Good evening, all, and welcome to tonight's meeting of the Economy Place Access and Transport Scrutiny Committee. We've got a fairly short agenda tonight, which means we probably jinxed things and we'll be here for about 4 hours. But welcome to all members and officers supporting the items. Couple of apologies to note. Councillor Nelson was initially going to be subbed by Councillor Merritt, but he's a bit poorly, so he can't join us tonight. And we've got Councillor Hook being substituted by Councillor Vassy. It's good to have you here. Welcome to the Fun House. So with apologies out of the way, are there any declarations of interest? No? Okay, cool. We'll move on. Minutes of our last meeting on the 22nd of January. I'm good to sign those, but do any members have anything to raise on those minutes? Councillor Pearson.
Thanks, Chair. It's just a comment around on page 7, item 22 about the work plan. We've got the committee discussed the prospect of pursuing a number of task and finish groups from full fibre broadband installation to community transport service. I mean, those were the only two that were mentioned. And then we've got members agreed to bring back an outline proposal for the task and finish groups. I think that was more to do with the community transport services, which is obviously on tonight's agenda as well. So I don't know if that way needs to be tweaked just to reflect that reality.
I'm looking at the right thing. Yeah. So maybe tighten up that resolved to, just to be more specific about the dial and ride report. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, in terms of bringing back the proposal, it was specifically around the dial and ride, from my recollection.
Yeah. Okay. Which matches my understanding too, to be honest. I mean, with that amendment, are you guys okay for me to sign?
Yes.
Thank you. In that case, I will. Can I do that before you amend it? Is there some sort of rule that says I can't?
Not that I know of. I think perhaps if we just.
Well, if I can, we'll do it again next time around. Yeah. All right. That's me. Thanks for that. And thanks for that, Councillor Pearson. Hi, Councillor Burton. Yeah. It's okay. Glad you're here. We have no one registered to speak in public participation tonight, which is always a shame. But without further ado, we'll jump on to the next item, which is a finance and performance monitor 3. I think we have Patrick Looker from the council officer team to present on that. Good to see you again, Mr. Looker. If you want to give a short overview and then members can ask questions. You've done this a million times.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Good evening, everyone. So this report presented to the committee covers the Monitor 3 finance and performance. It uses extracts of data that was considered by the executive on the 25th of January, so last month. The report provides members with details of the overall financial position of the council, which shows gross projected overspend of 11 million at Q3. Continuing trend of pressures, which I'm sure you're all aware about, primarily around social care, social services and children's services. There is a mitigation plan which could reduce the overspend to a more manageable position of just under £900,000, but that's based on successful delivery of mitigation measures. For this particular scrutiny, we're actually projecting an underspend across place services of around £1 million. Primarily due to increased parking revenues that have continued this financial year. We've also seen levels of income across waste services, additional gas prices this year, produced additional revenues there and recycling revenues. The main areas of overspend within place are across highways, and that's been due to inflationary pressures across insurance and street lighting energy. From paragraph 23, the business intelligence team have identified the performance scorecards relating to the new council plan. There's a lot of data in there, and I'm sure we'll try and answer what we can, but there's a huge number of officers who would be involved in these areas, so there might be a few questions which I do have to take note and get back to the committee if we don't have. Obviously, got James behind, who is the font of lots of knowledge within his particular service area. So with that, I'll pass over to any questions that you might have.
Thank you for that, Patrick. Any members wish to open proceedings? Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, it's not really an appropriate question because obviously it's looking backwards, but my question was just on green bins going forward, if I can. Is that all right? Just, yeah, sorry, apologies. So obviously you've got, I think, 720,000, isn't it? Which I would have thought would mean the invoices and the sign up has to be dropping through people's doors pretty imminently, and there's not anything. So when's the likely date for you know, it kicking in, and therefore what's the likely impact on the saving or income? Sorry.
So as you'll see, the savings are spread across 2 financial years. And that's not just to do with more people signing up, it's to do with the fact that we knew we wouldn't have, at the point of decision making, the time to put in a system in place for the start of the season. So it is, this year's income is based on a part year achievement. Round about June, July time-ish is the best guess of a go live date, but that's a guess at the moment.
And so will you write to everybody ahead of that point, and then they'll have a chance to?
Yeah, so there'll obviously be a significant comms exercise in terms of people who choose to participate and subscribe to this service, giving them sufficient time to do it before the sort of system to pay goes live. We will probably launch a way that you can say, I'm interested, and then we'll drop you an email when the system does go live.
Thank you for that. And I'm sure come the time, we'll need all councillors helping to get the word out on it across communities. And any further questions, Councillor Whitcroft?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, supplementary to that point regarding the green bins, in terms of, there is the forecast underspend mentioned on page 13.16. Regarding that underspend across waste disposal, it's registered here as 1.266 thousand. So I just wanted to understand whether the income levels there, that whether that will make a significant contribution towards evening out the underspend there, and whether the green bin charges have been considered in the forecast that we're going to be having for waste disposal costs.
So we're looking at 2 different financial years here. So we're £1.25 million underspend in 23-24. There has been some changes in the budget that were agreed by members last year, which increased some of the income targets that we have across waste. Some of the additional income that we do get in waste is actually because of lower tonnages going into Allerton Park. But that's not just CYC tonnages going into Allerton Park, it's also North Yorkshire Council tonnages going into Allerton Park. So where our residual tonnages are lower than we're forecasting, we have a mechanism whereby your waste collect commercial waste, which they put into Allerton Park, and then your waste pay us for the fact that they've had a disposal location within Allerton Park. That can't be assumed ongoing for next year to the level that it has been this year. Recycling prices have been higher at the beginning of the year than they are towards the end of the year as the economy and inflation has settled down. We know gas prices are coming down this year, so we're not expecting the same level of underspend in waste next financial year, taking all that into account. But then, as Councillor Stewart pointed out, that the garden waste will only be a part year impact in terms of what income we are able to achieve next year anyway.
Thank you. Councillor Healy.
Thank you, Chair. Paragraph 35, which is all around housing. First line is net additional homes provided in the year 22-23 is 459. As of Q2 23-24, so that's half a year, 152. But you've got the indicator was going up as good. Now, being a layman, if I was to double 152, that's significantly lower than 459 by a factor of I would like to do that and click my finger on someone who knows maths, about 25%. I would have said that was bad.
As a layperson, I would probably agree with you there, councillor Healy. Paragraph 30, and I'll go back to my colleagues in business intelligence. The paragraph in paragraph 36 does talk about a number of homes that are in the pipeline, and so whether or not they've incorporated that with regards to the forecast going forward to the rest of the year because of the strong pipeline of properties coming through. But as I say, I'll have to go back to my business intelligence colleagues to check that.
Yes, if you could do, because if you add 244 to 62, that gives you another 300. It's about the same. So yeah. Can I?
Paragraph.
What?
If you read paragraph 36, that answers your point.
Yeah, but still less.
Fewer.
Okay, yes, fewer. Can I follow up? Supplemental? The same with net housing consents. 324 at the halfway point. Previously 15,559. I would have said that was bad as well. So yeah, if you could just go back to business intelligence, that sort of graph just doesn't seem to make sense.
Thanks, councillor Healy. Councillor Vassy and then councillor Fenton and then councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's following up on the questions but one. I was just interested to understand how much the council earns from garden waste. So I haven't seen it. I've not seen figures previously either. I mean, on an annual basis, is that calculated separately? Do we have a figure for 23-24 or previous year?
Well, garden waste in current year doesn't provide a revenue to the council. It's a cost.
So the only income that comes in, just to contradict the accountant, it's not very often I get a chance to do this, but seeing as he set me up before, I'll set him up now. We have about 1,500 properties that pay for a second green waste bin at the moment. That's the only income we get at the moment from green waste. The change to the budget that was, I presume you're all there at February's budget session, said that it would introduce a charge for green waste across the piece. That's not happening yet. So the predictions in the budget for next financial year are mine and Patrick's best guess of what we think income levels will be.
Can I follow up, please, Chair? My understanding is that do we sell compost? Do we actively seek to do something with green waste to earn revenue?
Your waste, we pay less to dispose of it because your waste have a product at the end of it.
Right.
So our gate fee. So whenever you get rid of waste, you pay a fee.
Yeah.
Even for green waste, we pay a much lower fee for our green waste because they turn it into compost. They get the benefit, we get a lower fee. Unless I'm.
Yeah, you're right. It's not a significant figure that your waste gain for that particular sale of product. It's relatively low fee, and it's not a significant income earner to your waste. We do get, and James is quite right, we do get £65,000 from residents who have a second green bin at the moment.
And have we ever explored generating revenue from anaerobic biodigesters, et cetera, as a way of using waste to generate power?
The anaerobic digester is part of the facility at Allerton Park, and so organic waste goes into the anaerobic digester as part of our 25-year waste disposal facility, but the income from that is all linked into the payments that we make to the provider through the PPP, or what formerly was PFI contract.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is there isn't a separate calculation. We haven't computed how much garden waste arising from verges, whatever, might make in terms of a fixed sum, a discrete sum separate from the general waste stream.
Well, the garden waste is processed by your waste, so that's collected in the green bin goes to Hayward Wyn, where your waste process it and turn it into the current as rated compost. But there are regulations about what that can then be used for, and it is very limited at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. Page 13 of the report refers to car parking income being ahead of budget. I just wondered if you think that trend is likely to continue throughout the rest of the financial year, because obviously there have been some price increases as part of the range of measures to address the budgetary position. I just wondered whether there was any evidence of yet of increased charges driving lower use of car parks, or whether demand is still at the same level despite the increased charge.
Well, this report goes through to the end of November, and the charge, I think, went up in the middle of November, and November was strong. The first half of December, there was strong demand. It started to tail off a little bit towards the second half of December, and January has been quieter, but January is always the quietest month of the year. There have been probably unprecedented number of flooding events across the city, which has closed Esplanade and St George's Field. So it's difficult to use 1 month as a sort of guide. So I'm relatively confident that certainly at the busiest times, that demand is still very strong in the city.
Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you, Chair. This started as a question when I was looking at point 29 on page 16, and it sort of extended to a broader thought that I had about this report, which is about the breakdown of this within the city itself. Obviously, we're a city, that particular section talking about the earnings gap points out we are a city of a lot of diversity. There's a lot of different ways that people experience life across the city, and particularly this, I think, division to some extent between the centre and outer, which I expect sometimes may be the case in terms of the economy. I was just wondering whether there were opportunities to see on the breakdown between various factors outlined within this, but particularly on the earnings gap and how this is impacted between, for example, different parts of the city, and whether there's any data available on that, and whether that can add anything in additional to the narrative of this report.
Thank you, Councillor. It's obviously not an area of my particular expertise, but I'm sure our economic team would be able to provide further breakdown of the data that's in there, and they'd probably be more than happy to have quite a long conversation with yourselves about all the various information that they are able to keep, but I'm afraid that's not an area I can support you with tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Healy next, and then Councillor B. Burton.
Thank you. Supplemental first on Councillor Fenton's question. In this year, next year's budget, what assumption of loss of income have you made for the closure of Castle Car Park?
There's been no assumed reduction in income because of the closure of Castle Car Park. That would need a further decision by executive and would need to be considered as part of the budget as well. So the budget assumes that Castle will be open next year.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Again, I don't expect you to know the answer to this, but I think I might have asked it before this committee, or maybe on another one. Page 15, the table, GVA per head. I live in York, but my base office is London. Would my GVA be counted in York, or would it be counted in London? Again, feel free to take it away. It's just that York house prices were the highest in the land, which I would suggest was because a lot of people were moving into York from areas of higher house prices. And therefore, we've probably got quite a few richer citizens that are now not being captured by our figures at all.
I'd be guessing if I.
No, don't answer it, but yeah, if you could take it away,
Okay,
because
that
I've
away.
asked it twice now.
Don't I call you out? Not to me.
No, not,
right.
possibly not in this committee, it might have been in
I'll do my best to get back to you.
CFC,
It does ring a bell, to be honest. I think
Got an advice note back, the GVA briefing in January via email, but I can't recollect whether that specific information is in it.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah,
Okay, something to
can't
pick up
remember off
on.
the top of my head, but we have had information before, so maybe if we share that round before you do more work.
yeah,
on that.
it's just that may be artificially too low.
Thank you, councillor Healy. I've got councillor B Burton next, then councillor Pearson, then councillor Stewart.
Yeah, thanks. First one was just some clarification on Res Park. It provides a bit of detail about Res Park being above or below budget. Just wondered what's the kind of financial situation of Res Park? Is it an income generator overall in terms of staffing, or how does that add up for the council?
Yeah, it's a relatively small net income generator for the council. We obviously have staff who administer Res Park. We have staff on the street who enforce or otherwise in Res Park areas, but we also receive an income stream. We do provide a report each year, which is on the website, called the Parking Report, which does provide detail of all our parking revenues and where that spend goes as well.
We are set to get a parking focused scrutiny as well, I think in a couple of months, so we'll get the report to give us some detail on that. But carry on, councillor Burton. Sorry.
Great, yeah, thanks. And then the other one was just commercial property, obviously a strong generator of income. Is there any intention still, even though obviously the budget pressures are quite high generally, is there still work being done to identify further commercial property opportunities?
Well, the government have tightened up local authorities in speculative commercial property investment. So where if the council was to undertake further commercial investment, there would have to be a good economic rationale for it, and it would have to be for more than the basis of purely financial reason for doing it. Though it's kind of in relation to a number of councils who've gone off and bought very large commercial investment estates, often not in the local area that they work in. So the government has stated if authorities do that, they won't have access to cheaper PWLB borrowing for a year. So if we were to look at any such investments, there would have to be a very, very strong business case for doing such.
Sorry about one more. I remember one more. Just and last one was facilities management with having issues in terms of getting tenants into the building, filling in terms of costs in from that. Are we forecasting that we'll receive additional tenants this year, or is that forecasted to expect to carry on in the way it is currently?
We are forecasting that we will be able to fill more of the office than we've currently got. The commercial property manager is in negotiations with a number of businesses about letting further space at the moment.
Thank you for that, councillor Pearson.
Thanks, Chair. My question was around point 30 on page 17, which is around vacant city centre shops. Obviously interested in the economy. We're in inflation and we've got rising interest rates for borrowing money and stuff like that. I just wondered if you could talk around that particular issue and how you think it might be affecting things, but also with regards to council-owned property and retail units, are we doing as much as we can to ensure that the rates are reasonable and that we are ensuring that we have an active high street?
Certainly from the city council owned properties, they are pretty much full. The only voids I can think of in city council properties are those that would just be within the usual X months of turnover from one to another. All I can say is what the report really says is, yes, there's been an increase in the number of empty properties, but we are still significantly below the national and regional average in terms of the number within the city centre. They're very complicated arrangements about who actually owns shops, what rents they're charging, but certainly within those in control of the city council, we're pretty much full at the moment.
Thank you for that. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. So my first question relates very closely to Councillor Pearson's point. In that, I appreciate in the report it does say that obviously we're lower than the national average at about just under 10%, which, you know, I think is fine. I mean, for me, I'd always expect to be lower than the regional average, because I do think that, you know, the appeal and the attraction of York is, for me, vastly superior to a lot of other cities in the region. But the particular sort of thought I was having, I mean, it's great, Patrick, in terms of, you know, the council doing what it can with its own properties, is that these vacant shops, which are a real problem on Coney Street and the surrounding area, and very high profile, have a problem for various reasons. But one of those, you know, is obviously the lack of business rates that we're getting. And so I suppose the sort of specific question I've got is a typical, I know there is no typical, but a typical sort of shop on Coney Street, if there was somebody in it and business rates were received, and then obviously they go into our pool and we get a share back, how much roughly would that be? Because when we sort of look at things like, you know, economic development and Make It York, you know, spending a bit extra to help get a tenant in could look peanuts compared to the business rate. So are they all public, the rates, I guess? Could you give me an example of a shop and the rates to sort of gauge that?
Off the top of my head, I'd need to do a bit of digging into it, but all properties across the city are publicly available on the valuation agency website, so you can pretty much see what the rateable value for all shops are that are occupied at the moment. It is complicated due to there's only so much that the council can do with regards the commercial property and the landlords who are owning those, and what their plans for the buildings are, some of which will be looking to seek new tenants in, but others might be looking at selling particular properties, and again, it's very complicated in terms, well, certainly for me, very complicated in terms of what the value of the property is on their books and what they're able to let it for. And some commercial landowners prefer to have a vacant asset at a notional rent of such than actually reducing the rent to a level that would get a tenant in, but they'd have to offset the value within their portfolio on their balance sheet. So it is very complicated, and what the council can actually do to encourage tenants into some of those businesses. But I do know that Make It York have been working particularly in those which have been empty for a long time to actually at least get some form of usage in those shops, whether or not it's temporary exhibitions or temporary use within them.
And my second question is back to the parking. Now, obviously, in the budget we just approved, we've got a big change in parking in that we're increasing the budget by 1.2 million. So, you know, sort of about 20%. And as I think I'm right in saying that for years it's been consistently over budget in terms of what we've been receiving. Now, obviously, it's good to be able to take that, as it were, extra income in the budget planning. But from an accountancy point of view and the sort of, you know, office recommendation side, what's the sort of background to that? Because I would have thought, you know, when you're consistently getting a lot more income than you expected, we should have been increasing the budgeted income year on year rather than having this massive jump of 20%.
I think with regards to the parking income, the pandemic had a very significant impact on use of car parks to some extent. So obviously in 2020, was 2020, wasn't it? Parking revenues dropped off a cliff. It was really in the recovery sense has been stronger than we were originally expecting. So in financial year 21-22, there were still some elements of lockdowns and delays in properly reopening the economy. 2020, but the summer was particularly busy, but a lot of that was on the basis of were people going abroad, they weren't able to go abroad, therefore they were coming to York. So we've almost had to have a couple of years where we're comfortable enough to recommend now that this year is actually an average year, and this is the sort of numbers that we are seeing coming back into the city. Therefore, we've got confidence for next financial year to say, yes, you can bank that increase, which I think this time last year we'd probably been a little bit nervous about whether it was going to continue at that kind of level.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions, if I may, and then we might wrap it up unless there's people. I've got you, Councillor Burton. Do you want to, is it a supplementary on that, or? You go first then, yeah.
I just noticed that the number of electric charging points has actually gone down a few, just 7, and the 110 altogether. I thought there was the Park and Ride Centre out at Ascombe Bar. Is that operational now? And why are there fewer than there were before? If you know that.
I don't off the top of my head. I'll need to go away and check those numbers with the team. Which paragraph is that under?
It's on page 29, and it's hang on. It's CAN 026 026.
I'll have to go away and double check. I think the narrative on it says that the definition's changed though at some point. So whether that definition change is causing the numbers to look odd, I'll need to understand what that definition change is. So do you see what it says in that the definition changed in 21-22?
Right.
What in terms of definition of what an EV charging point is?
That's what I'm reading. I don't know any more than what's in front of you.
Yeah.
That's what it says to me.
Okay.
The definition of what an EV charging point has changed.
Yeah.
I'm certainly not aware of any facilities that we've taken out, and certainly the facility at Monk's Cross is now operational from April, as is the Hyper Hub at Poppleton Park and Ride. So
yeah, that's another one worth a look at, because it did catch my eye too, and I'm sure it did with other colleagues. Councillor Bassey, is that a hand or just a? Okay, well, I'll go and then you can. All right, cool. Thank you, Councillor Brent. Did you have any more questions while you were? Cool. All right. So if I may, I want to briefly jump back to green bins, and this is it's regarding the sort of system that we'll end up using to sort of take payments, manage deliveries. We already have a system for households that have 2 green bins. Is the thinking currently to basically use the system that's dealing with the 2nd green bin and make it much bigger, or will a challenge be such that we'll need something entirely different?
We're looking at something different. The scale of 2nd green bins at the moment is relatively small, so we use a human interface in reality to organise that. Obviously, the scale of potentially 90,000 fingers crossed signing up would be a very different scenario. So we're looking at a different solution and more self-serve for those that can, and then the human interaction for those people that whatever reason can't use a digital self-serve solution.
Cool, thanks for that. I'm sure we'll hear much more about it as work progresses. And my other question is, it's sort of fairly macro, and I apologise for that, but obviously there's nothing yet to give anyone any confidence that the financial situation that this council and many other councils are under is going to change anytime soon. And I'd be interested in your confidence as officers in effectively cost saving targets and our ability to meet them in the coming year and beyond. I mean, I expect officers like yourselves to say you're confident, but in reality, these are very difficult to meet, aren't they, moving forward? We've just passed the budget. Any comments on that?
Well, yeah, you've agreed the budget last week, where we've got £14 million worth of savings on the table. I'm incredibly confident that a large chunk of those savings will be delivered. I'm moderately confident that some of those savings will be delivered. I'm less confident that other savings will be delivered. But in the same way as what we've been doing this year, we'll probably have to have some form of mitigation where those savings aren't being delivered. We'll have to look at ways that we can manage those in different ways, as we've done in previous years. So the fact that places is forecasting an underspend of £1 million this year, we haven't been saying, well, let's use some of that revenue and spend it in areas of priorities. We're holding it back on the basis of underspends elsewhere across the council. So we will be monitoring savings delivery as the year goes on. That will be a very important piece of work that we need to do, particularly on those areas where you'll have noticed in the budget that was approved last year is slightly more generic. So we're looking at £900,000 savings across the place area. So I'll be very keen on keeping an eye and a scorecard in terms of how we're delivering those and how we're taking reductions out of the budget process as the year progresses. And we'll be doing our monitoring reports in the same way through to executive, and we'll be getting reports through to you at Scrutiny. So anything that Scrutiny can do to support in sort of monitoring those or supporting some of those areas or looking at areas where you think that potentially efficiencies can be made, that would certainly be very welcome from Scrutiny.
I think just to add to that, I wouldn't underestimate the amount of due diligence work that officers do to put together that list to make sure it is deliverable. There is, almost from the day after the election, we had some conversations with members and some steers so that officers could do that due diligence work to prepare the list of savings as it comes forward to full council. So there is a lot of work goes into preparing that, not just by Patrick and his teams, but by the officers that manage those services as well, so that they can start to understand what those savings might be, understand that, get the work in place, start to think about the decision making required. So that's why you see the budget and green waste going to the same meeting of executive, because actually we're trying to line up those decisions so that we get the best possible chance of delivery.
Thanks for your answers. Yeah, just it's a sort of, I think it's an active interest for us all, but these often, a lot of the tough decisions that are made are only tough decisions if they're really seen through. Otherwise they're just tough conversations that happen in meetings and then aren't lived through in reality. So yeah, it's something we'll all have to keep a close eye on, and I'm sure Scrutiny will try and support wherever it can. But appreciate your answers. We had another hand on my left. Councillor Healy, sorry, go on. It might well have been. Fire away, Councillor Vassie.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is really a point of information, really, and to rehearse the point with officers while we're here. In health scrutiny, when we last had these performance monitors, I drew attention to the fact that on the various charts, very few or comparatively few of the indicators are benchmarked, and very often it just says not available. And that concerns me, because if we're trying to make comparisons, I'd like to know how we fit in with regional or national figures. Some of it's obvious why they don't have a benchmark. Number of people arriving at York Station, obviously that's specific to here. But survival of newborn businesses, universal credit claimants, index of cycling activity. I think when we discussed this health scrutiny, Patrick, you agreed that there might be reason to look again at how these figures are presented to ensure that there are benchmarks so that we can contextualize ourselves against other local authorities. would that apply here as well?
I think, to be fair to the business intelligence team who maintain these records, because some of them have been newly agreed as part of the new council plan, so they only came into operation from I think it was October time. There probably is ongoing work to see what further data we can get from some of these, which will support members with understanding the information that's going through. So I see them very much as being work in progress to in that regard. But again, I shall pass your comments on.
Right, thank you. Yes, yes, Chair. I mean, basically, it's to have those comparators to other places as well as just looking at ourselves over time.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Bassett. I think it's a fair point to raise. It's something I'd happily see as a recommendation from this committee, just to make sure that that work is going on. I'm sure it is. But if we make a formal note of that as a recommendation, then it's something we can come back to in terms of accountability. So that's something I'd be keen to put forward, if colleagues are happy with that. Any other recommendations coming to mind, or are we okay with that? I mean, I'm grateful for officers' time and answers to the best of your ability. Appreciate it's a massive area to cover, and you can't be close to absolutely everything. I'll take silence as happiness. Yeah, and we'll move on to the next item. Thank you. Cheers. So our next item, we'll have to forgive the name, that might be down to me. Looking at York's Waterworks. Thank you, Patrick. And this comes from the work planning meeting that the committee had back in the summer, where I think it was Councillor Hook raised a keen interest in having this on an agenda in this year. So here we are. We still have James at the table. He's very welcome, of course. And we have Steve Ragg joining us as well. Thank you for being with us tonight, Steve. We should take this report as read, but if you can give an opening spiel, that would be grand, and then we'll open up for questions, comments.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members of the Scrutiny Committee. Yeah, I think as that introduction has shown that there's been a desire for this paper to come in front of this Scrutiny Committee, and in exploring the broad ask, I think various members put forward suggestions of what they'd like to see in a paper before them. So the summary in the first couple of paragraphs there of the paper highlights the things that were there, and I think essentially cutting through the narrative there, it's about the cleanliness and the water quality of our watercourses and our becks and streams. And then the second bullet there in paragraph 1 is really about the status of our drainage infrastructure and the different actors and the different people that are involved in its maintenance, its upkeep or its improvements. The report is brief, but links to Annex 1, which expands on the two areas further. And again, take it as read, but I'd just like to point out a few little bits and pieces in there. The second page, which is page 38 of the pack, shows the different organisations that have an influence on river quality, which I'm sure is something that will be discussed when we come to discussion points in a second. And you can see that there's a ranging list of different bodies and groups there, but ultimately the Environment Agency are responsible for water quality assessments, and all of those different actors in the bullets above have a role to play in amongst that. The remainder of page 39 and into page 40 touches on some of the different groups that are involved in biodiversity, river and riverside regeneration type aspects, and it talks about the various friends of groups that do fantastic work in some of the members' areas around this table, and other councillors that aren't here now, as well as the people like Friends of St Nicholas Fields and others. And then page 41 onwards talks about York's drainage infrastructure, and again talks about the different actors that are involved, not just the city council's roles in the first bullet there, but the Environment Agency, internal drainage boards. And I know several members, a few members around this table are involved in internal drainage boards around the city. And then talks about a few key things that will be coming either later this year. I know that sort of one of the councillors around the table wanted discussion around sustainable drainage, and there's some narrative around there, our current role in planning and the delivery of sustainable drainage improvements, but also changes with legislation in the Flood and Water Management Act. And there's also discussion on Yorkshire Water's combined sewer overflow reduction programme and government's initiatives around that, not just within that part of the paper, but early in the paper as well. And then the last part of the paper there talks about the council's highway drainage gully maintenance programme and the work we do around that. So I think rather than point to various things in there, take questions or observations or things that people would like to explore further. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Steve. I should have said as well, we've got Councillor Jenny Kent, one half of the executive member role that sort of covers this area. I'm sure Councillor Kent might want to contribute on particular parts of this discussion. But firstly, committee hands who have got, I think you were first, Councillor Whitcroft, but I've got you. Councillor Whitcroft, then Fenton, B. Burton, Stewart. Okay, let's stick to that if we can. Then Councillor Vassy, nice cue. Fire away, Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for this report. I represent Fishergate, which is one of the riverside wards, and obviously every year we have our issues with flooding along Newark, and we're very pleased that the council is so switched on and making sure that we can deal with the problems that brings up, and residents are incredibly used to it as well. I have a few points I'd like to make and a couple of sort of very specific questions that I'm supposing that or at least one very specific question that I'm probably going to have to expect feedback on, but I'm more than happy for the wait. The first aspect, it links the two things together, the health of the waterways and the drainage. So when there has been a flood in York, as we saw recently, and then the water subsides, there's a lot of detritus left in areas where there normally wouldn't be, particularly the mud, which becomes a real hazard and difficult risk, particularly for people who are walking along. But also we managed to have a fallen tree wedged along Newark until recently, which was removed as a result of the flooding. I'd just like to understand the role that we've got in terms of making sure that the detritus that comes from flooding is cleaned, including the mud, but also the extra things that come off the river. And I'd sort of understand if there are any lessons learned or ways that we've aimed to improve and develop our ability to deal with that, because obviously we have it every year. We're an old hand at this in York, but there's always more to be learned. And I did have residents along Newark calling me and telling me about particular items of that. I'd just like to understand what the process is right now, whether there's scope to improve that in the future.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, so our warping policy, which is an old term for clean up after flooding, our warping policy is online. So you can go online and look at the flood pages, and you can see our policy and approach towards riverside cleanup after a flood. And it lists in a priority order the locations that we address after floodwaters subside. So that's there, that's reviewed, that's considered, after every flood season, certainly, but certainly after anything that would give rise to us to consider that differently. It's a well-practiced process, as you suggest, and we know the areas that flood, and we know where the grand accumulations of silt and detritus are. So we believe that it's pretty well targeted already, but I'm sure that councillors may have other areas that they will point to. Our highways maintenance teams carry out that work as the flood warnings and the flood alerts are downgraded by the Environment Agency and the river goes back within bank. Those teams mobilise and start to deliver that warping process in accordance with that policy. It takes a long time. It's difficult work. Thick river silts, slippy conditions, the way that we, we control access into those areas whilst the crews are out there with either, some places are a combination of sweepers and jetting, some places are more jetting rather than sweepers, depending on where we are within the city. And it takes somewhere up to around 2 weeks to do that. The problems we have are invariably flood season, and as a flood risk professional, I don't always use that term because we see floods all year round, is also the same time of year when we see freezing conditions. And the same crews that carry out that riverside cleanup are the same crews that are called out of bed at 3, 4 a.m. to drive the gritters and carry out winter maintenance procedures. So freezing conditions can put a halt to the riverside cleanup often. Subsequent flood peaks can call a halt to it. And I don't need to draw anyone's attention to this flood season, this winter. We've had 7 named storms that have brought considerable operations within the city for City of York Council, Yorkshire Water and the Environment Agency. And there were 2 or 3 of those peaks in a row where we started the cleanup, but then the forecasting changed from the Environment Agency and meant that we had to pause that procedure because the river started to come up again. There were some periods where we got in and got it pretty much done, but then the river came up again. It has been a testing winter in that regard. So we do understand it well, and we can only work in those areas once the river's gone back in channel and the flood warnings and flood alerts have gone down. But repeat flood peaks, the winter challenges and the call on our teams to do other things are all the things that can take the crews away from that.
Thanks for that. I've got Councillor Jane Burton with a supplementary.
It's just things that have been brought up within the Micklegate ward. And I don't know whether this is true or not. I have had people saying to me that they feel that Councillor Whitcroft's side is cleaned up first, but I'm sure that's not the case. I've tried to assure people that that isn't the case. I've also had a resident in the independent living complex, City Mills, and they've said it's obviously they have the bridge over the road there to get to it, but because of the river going up and down so much this year, there's been a lot of mud, and they haven't been able to go to put their bins out because they're quite elderly. So I wondered if that sort of could be, I don't know how that could be cleaned in between times. I noticed, living locally myself, that the walkway that's built there has been left up for some time, but I suppose no one's going in and when it goes down to clean away the mud. I don't know that that's a priority. It might be better for somebody within the complex to take their people's rubbish out rather than them to slip.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. Again, I'd say our prioritised approach towards warping is online and there and for all to see. So if residents and the community do feel that one side of the river or one location, so there is a reason and thinking behind that. However, we're always happy to review that and take forward any information. Similarly, the impacts of silts and detritus preventing bins going out and the like, this winter's been a challenging one in that particular property will have struggled to get their refuge out at times, just purely because of the amount of water that's been standing on Skelder gates. However, if there were riverside cleanups that were needed because of the way that access structure into the property has entrapped or caused more silts to gather, it's probably worth them while dropping us a direct message so we can understand it better. And I don't know what could be done, but of course we'll be open to look at that.
I mean, I did just say don't take it out yourself because they're very elderly people.
Yes, of course.
Some of them get member of the staff to do
exactly, yeah. But if there is a way that's been made more difficult by that structure, then let us know and we can look into it.
Yeah.
I mean, appreciate that exchange and your offer to look into it, but I've one supplementary to your supplementary, which is, does the council have an idea or a list of sort of awkward locations of accommodation where I don't know, arrangements are put in place in advance of knowing that there's going to be issues brought about by floods, or is it very case by case, as and when?
Chair, it depends on the description of awkward, of course.
Yeah,
However, I mean, taking that at its widest.
Yeah.
What we do as the floods escalates and tactical and strategic level command and control structures kick in, we work with business intelligence team to extract the latest information on vulnerable property or residents or locations and address and target any response needs in accordance with that. So essentially, in a nutshell, I think the response to your question is we would look to target our services specifically around how the floods impacted them, or in a slightly different way in accordance with that information as the flood escalates. James.
Can I just come back? I think what Steve's talked about is at that extreme end. But I think what a lot of the nuisance flooding, we have quite a tight plan in terms of triggers. So we know Castle Mills at a certain level, we will go out and do that. And basically the teams know that as soon as that EA alert, predicted river level, Viking recorder hits this, they need to go out and build that scaffold bridge. The same with the facility, the thing out at Fulford that we build. So all those flood defences are triggered by river levels from the EA. So we have that plan of what we need to do for specific buildings or communities. When we get beyond the sort of usual flooding, that's exactly what Steve talks about. So if we're talking about evacuating properties or those sorts of scenarios, which touch laminate, we've not had to do, certainly in my time here, but we have prepared for it in some of our floods in the last 6 years. We absolutely, as Steve described, go to business intelligence. They can pull us off the list. We can share that with social care colleagues. We can share it with NHS police. So those are the people we prioritise if we are doing an evacuation, for instance.
Thank you for that. Go back to the original list, Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions Councillor Hook would have asked if she'd been here, but she's unwell, so I said I would ask them on her behalf. The report sets out the range of organisations that have an interest and involvement: internal drainage boards, council, Yorkshire Water, EA. So Councillor Hook's question was: has any thought been given to, from a resident's perspective, what more could we do to make it easier for residents to understand who they should contact about a particular issue with a particular watercourse or drainage system, or whether ringing the council or emailing the council, through that mechanism they will be directed to the appropriate agency rather than being told, sorry, it's not our responsibility, goodbye. So there's that question. And then secondly, the report refers to the sort of gully cleaning and drain jetting, drain cleaning. And she was asking whether there is any coordination in terms of sometimes sweeping curbsides can lead to things going down drains that may lead to them becoming over time blocked. So in terms of the schedule of road sweeping, the schedule of sort of drain jetting, is there a coordination in terms of, we're not going to clear out a drain and then the following day the road sweeper will go along the same road and potentially sweep the road in with extra thick bristle brushes, which are very good, but it adversely tips stuff down into the drain. So she asked me to raise the issue of whether there is any coordination on that side of things. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. The response to the first question is we have a local flood risk management strategy which is available on our websites. We've refreshed that. It's ready for republication. It just needs accessibility process putting onto it. That document is a signposting document essentially, and will help residents and businesses identify the who you're going to call test is what I always say on this one. There are a lot of actors involved in flood risk management, and every national or regional flood review since I've been involved in the industry has always said it's a confusing array of different people involved in this. Our local flood risk management strategy and, other local authorities' strategies does outline the roles and responsibilities that are out there for the different watercourses, whether they're IDBs or the council or environment agency main rivers, and does include information on how to contact those different organisations. So I can speak to Councillor Hook outside of this if required, but that would be the go-to document for that. The second question regarding gully jetting and sweeping, I think there's more to do on that. Is the short and direct answer. We do target both in terms of priority need, but there could be more linkages between the two, and I see James is going to come in as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say one of the things we're looking at in terms of public realm is looking at the way public realm operates with other teams. So how do the cleansing teams follow the waste teams, so that if there is wind-blown recycling, can they follow up? And also linking that with the very point you made about trying to combine the gully and sweeping process. We do have a list of non-runners which we know are issues, and there's a team that works through those gullies that we know we have issues with. So any reports that we come in and we check and they're not running, they are added to the programme of projects for the team.
Thank you for that. Councillor Jane Burton, was that supplementary you had?
Yeah.
Yep, fire away.
It's in relation to the first part of the question about the flooding. I mean, I was evacuated in 2000, which was incredibly well organised. 2015, though, which came on Boxing Day, it wasn't still in the same house. It wasn't at all well organised. I think it took people unawares, and I believe you were quite new in role around that time. I think, though, that since then, there's been a deal of planning has gone on, because I've been to some of the induction meetings on planning for such emergencies, and there are different types of emergencies being planned for within the council, and it all seems to me like it's a lesson was really learnt from the 2015 flood, especially because the telephone system went down and the mobile system went down, and we're all like, oof, this is a bit strange to say the least. But I think, that was a really catastrophic flood because of the failure of the flood barriers. And since then, we've got all these amazing new flood barriers around and about the place. So I think people feel a lot safer than they did. And I feel a lot reassured by the training I've been given. So
I think what I would say is, when it comes to flooding, we are in the fortunate or unfortunate, depending on your perspective, position to be able to learn quite a lot. And actually we spend quite a lot of time talking to other councils about what we've done and what we've developed and what they can possibly learn from us. Equally, what we've got to look at is what other places have learned from different emergencies that we don't necessarily experience. And you're absolutely right. We spent a lot of time over the last few years spending a lot of time looking at those other emergencies that other places have faced, and how would we deal with those? What can we do in terms of preparation? Have we got the plans in place? So true emergency planning isn't about flooding, particularly in York. We tend to get 24, 48 hours notice of flooding. 2015 was obviously a different set of circumstances, and we didn't have that feed-in time. But other emergencies could happen now when you've got no warning whatsoever. So it's making sure we're prepared for all eventualities.
I think, yeah, the one thing I would add to that is the 2015 Boxing Day floods. We're predominantly of the 330 properties and businesses that flooded. The vast majority of them were behind the Foss barrier in the Foss basin and further upstream. It was the second biggest flood on record on the River Ouse, but was within the defences that we had at the time, apart from some locations like Kingsstayth and the like. But it was the biggest flood on record on the River Foss, and it overwhelmed the design capacity of the Foss barrier. And we talk a lot about people's readiness for flooding and their resilience and their understanding of the risk. And even behind a flood defence like the Foss barrier, which was one of the Environment Agency's major structural assets in the country, even behind the Foss barrier, levels when the pumps working were held well within channel, levels were really benign, and people's understanding and knowledge of the flood history of the Foss Basin was pretty much zero. Whereas on the ooze frontage and places like King's Staithe and the like, and you look at what happens at the King's Arms and the way that they continue to trade literally a day, maybe 36 hours after the floodwaters disappeared. Many businesses and down Fossgate and the like, their knowledge and comprehension of the impacts of flooding that could affect them was pretty minimal. So, we always need to ensure that people, no matter how well protected there is always a risk, even with the £100 million plus investment that's happened since 2015 Boxing Day floods. Those locations are still at risk of flooding because defences can be overtopped, overwhelmed, or could fail. It's difficult not to set a doomsday scenario when we talk about those things, but people still need to understand that there's a residual risk even with those sort of assets in place. So that was the big difference with the Boxing Day 2015 floods, just people's readiness and awareness of that potential flood risk.
Thank you. Sure.
All I could say was that once people realised what was happening, it took a bit longer than was felt comfortable. The response was really good. So I'm sure that won't happen again. And it was just the timing as well was terrible.
Councillor Ben Burton.
Yeah, thanks. Two areas of questions. So the first one, I've kind of had lots of questions originally around kind of mitigations upstream and tree planting, but eventually realised that we don't have an awful lot of control over that because, much of this is outside of our own catchment area as a city. So I guess the question on that is, how do we represent our voice in kind of wider policy upstream in terms of other local authorities, local plans and other flood risk strategies in terms of stopping discharge, whether that's agricultural waste or anything else? Yes.
Well, actually, we do have quite a voice, councillor. But you are correct. It's on paper, it's challenging, isn't it? We're a tightly bound urban authority with the vastness of North Yorkshire Council above us. There's 3,500 square kilometres of catchment, the Swale Ure and Nid catchment, forming the Ouse district stream of York. But we've recognised that, and we were successful in getting funding from DEFRA just nearly 2 years ago now, for a catchment scale project. So we're leading on it, City of York Council lead on it, but we're working with North Yorkshire Council, with the National Parks, with the various rivers trusts up there, the Dales to Vales Rivers Trust and other organisations, to work with land managers and farmers and landowners to incentivise the uptake of what we call natural flood management measures. We've got almost £6 million worth of investment to do this. So we're doing very, very detailed computer modelling of the catchment to target where the different interventions could work. We've got demonstrator sites to show what it would look like. And natural flood management are things like afforestation, restoring the grips on moorland, marginal planting, changing the way in which land is managed, aeration of the soil, and lots of different practices. And we're looking through that programme of work, which runs to April 2027. And the project team's working on that through till then to actually kickstart, that wholesale uptake of these sort of measures, and then link into a wider future strategy across that catchment, which could be something in the in the devolved administration as it comes to fruition, or other ways of embedding that going forward. But yeah, on paper it did look challenging to do that, but we were successful in the funding bids that we put together. And I'm really pleased to say that we're acting well outside of our boundaries on that. So hopefully that will really help us to be on the front foot. In terms of river quality, we're also linking up across that same catchment area with some work, I think it was referenced in the reports, with University of York, who are looking at diffuse agricultural pollution. We do, and rightfully so, question and scrutinise the role of our water and sewage companies, Yorkshire Water for us, and and the combined overflows that they manage, or could manage differently or better perhaps. But the inputs from agricultural runoff are significant in terms of water quality, and with such a large rural area and economy upstream of us, the impacts from that area are significant. So we're working with the University of York with their programme, which is looking to address and assess the scale of the impact of that. And again, we can help them target interventions through the same modelling that we're doing as well. So hopefully, we're a way off that yet, but hopefully that will be an area where we can start to influence that as well.
Thank you. Great when you ask a question and get such a comprehensive list of great things that we're already doing. So thanks for that. The other bit, little technical side, this Schedule 3 SUDS advisory board, approval board. First of all, just some overview on what this is. I know it's still being decided, it seems, by the government in that classic sense where they push things back and don't quite make their mind up on exactly what they want to do. But how much of an impact it's going to make? So obviously we have a responsibility in terms of the approval of surface water drainage designs already in the city, and we have some level of adoption of things like road gullies, but how much more responsibility is this going to add to us in terms of adoption, in particular, in terms of what we're responsible for on these schemes?
Yeah, so sustainable drainage is essentially the urban version of natural flood management that I've just talked about before. You know, it's mimicking natural processes. So rather than out of sight, out of mind, buried pipe work below the ground with a finite capacity, it's bringing drainage to the surface, swales and ditches and ponds. So if you go to Vanguard, for example, and see the infrastructure that's around the Vanguard site there is a good example, or Derwentthorpe is another good example. And there's already a presumption in favour of SUDS within the National Planning Policy Framework, as some of you will be aware. And we do everything we can within the tools that are given us under the NPPF to actually get SUDS in all new developments. We've got some good gains around the city. But unfortunately, it was a watered down version of Schedule 3 that was put into force back in 2014. And government's assessment of what are SUDS was essentially about attenuation, so flood storage for all new developments. So we are seeing some great gains on all developments where the attenuated flow from a development is such where it's not causing a risk to itself or its neighbours in terms of flood risk, but it's not sustainable drainage. It's not creating green spaces. It's not bringing it to the surface. It's not bringing it to the fore. So there's been quite a lot of lobbying of governments to actually fully enact Schedule 3. So Schedule 3 will be about proper SUDS in all developments of over one property or more. So anything that's more than a single property. And it will be a cradle to grave approach. So there will be, it will run parallel to planning. So it's running parallel to the planning process, a separate process, and there will be assessment and work with the developers, an approval process to actually show that what they're planning is appropriate, workable and amenable. But then there will be an adoption requirement by the SAB, which will be unitary or county level authorities. So we would be the SAB. We don't know exactly what it will entail yet. Government enacted this back in January last year. There's been some work in the background to start to assess this. They've said there will be a new burdens assessment to identify how each SAB will resource the SAB. But we're not really seeing the scale of that. There's been some surveys and some assessments of the skills and capacity that might be needed. But it will place a considerable burden on the SAB to actually adopt and then maintain into perpetuity these sustainable drainage features. Exactly how that will be funded is still not confirmed either. Will it be commuted sums, which are often less than ideal, or will it be some local legal instrument that would allow us to draw down that funding, or something akin to 106 or SIL or the like? We really don't know yet, but it's recognised that it is a significant burden. But it's also recognised that it will be the step change in surface water management that we need. A new development now manages its surface water in a much better way than any development in the 90s, the 80s, or even in towards the end of the 1990s. But just because of the improvement in planning policy that we've had going forward, this will be the bit that will really step change it further. But the simple answer is we don't know yet. Where will it be vested within our authority? We don't know. With the adoption and the maintenance, perhaps it's more towards the operational side, perhaps towards the teams within the depot, you know, highway maintenance type teams, or would it be within highways regulation, highways adoptions? You know, we've got all of that to come yet once government releases more information, but there will be significant burden. But, you know, as a flood risk professional, I do believe that it will bring considerable benefits as well.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, I've got you, Councillor Haley, but I had a hand from Councillor Kent as well. If you.
About SUDS, so it's also a supplemental, but I don't, let Councillor Haley go first. So are you able to say what capacity or opportunities there might be with the new local transport plan or otherwise for SUDS to be put in terms of repairs to roads or existing roads, so not just new developments, to make it more mainstream across the city, given the advantages, particularly in a flooding city?
Yeah, you look at the National Planning Policy Framework as presumption in favour, as I say, so anything within that has a planning requirement, so some of the large scale redevelopments, whether it's York Central or the Outer Ring Road or the like, are putting in place sustainable drainage as part of that, so station frontage, etc. But pure highway schemes that are perhaps outside of that planning structure, that regenerational approach, colleagues within highways adoptions are looking to see what elements of SUDS they can start to bring into their armoury, you know, of the measures that were put in place with, you know, with any new highway developments. There are good examples around the country. Sheffield's a really good example. There's some great, the Greater Green process in Sheffield is a really good example, where SUDS are being introduced within the adopted highway margins and public spaces. You know, and we've done some good things there, but I think colleagues are looking into that at the minute, and I think, you know, we need to move further with that to actually get it into pure highway policy thinking, but you know, they are starting to consider that more so.
Thank you. Councillor Haley.
Picking up on your point and the supplemental, should we be building into the council house maintenance programme then something to raise their level of, I'm going to use the word SUDS again, for housing estates that, as you say, don't anywhere meet the sort of current standards?
For some of the new housing sites around the city, so thinking about the developments in Westfield recently and other areas, the planning policy is driving that forward. Are you thinking in terms of
retrofitting?
Retrofitting, yeah. Colleagues have looked at some of the measures. I think the problem, I think we're certainly the consideration with a lot of these measures, we're talking about land take. When you bring in SUDS features to the surface, whether they are swales or ponds, there's the perception that it takes up space within the development. So if you've already got a developed area, trying to put in sustainable drainage features as a retrofit is often difficult. One thing where we haven't looked, which could be considered, and colleagues of mine over in Hull and other areas have looked at the provision of water butts and other water saving features across housing areas. It's not always straightforward because, you know, when they're full, if they're not being drained down, they're not really playing a role. So you could have, you know, something that auto empties after the rainfall's gone, perhaps. So there are things we could do to the fabric of the building that could help. But in terms of wider SUDS methodologies, where we've already got these developments in place, you would have to introduce significant areas of the site over to blue infrastructure, if you like. You would often talk about blue-green infrastructure, don't we? Which would be fantastic, but could often be seen as a bit of an issue. But things against the fabric of the building, perhaps we could do a little more around that.
Councillor Vassy, supplementary, yeah?
Supplementary, yes,
Wow.
thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's just relating to what you've been talking about there. A good reference point would be to look at what they've done in Malmö in Sweden, where in the Augustenberg district of the city, they had flooding problems for decades with all the council housing and apartment blocks. And they transformed the management by creating ponds and diverting water through drainage systems and introducing green roofs. and that completely sorted the problem out. I imagine you're aware of what they've done there. So to me, it's just a fantastic example of what can be done by managing water flow differently.
I have quite a few photographs of Malmo in many presentations that I give. So yes, yeah, it is a really good example. Yes.
Do you know if the Malmo council has over a decade of hard austerity before implementing that? Not sure, but it's a very interesting though, genuinely. Thanks, councillor Vesey. Councillor Pearson, supplementary, yeah, and then we'll go back to the main queue.
Mine's a new question, so.
Okay, can I put you at
Yeah,
the bottom of the queue? With all due respect, of course. Thanks. I believe councillor Stewart, you're next in line.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just from my point of view, I'm always very conscious trying to think where we can make the difference. And obviously, you touched on drainage boards, and I'm on a drainage board. I've seen you there. And I've been to 3 meetings, and I've not spoken at all because I can't add any value at that drainage board. We've got a chair who's very experienced. We've got a professional who is just that, and a professional clerk, and then we've got a load of farmers, and they know their stuff. And I remember one point in a meeting where I think they were talking about cutting the flailing. Is it the flailing term? Yeah. And they're saying, well, if it wasn't working, what was the process for it being fed back that it wasn't working? And a couple of people looked knowingly around the room, and it was just like, if you've got a load of Yorkshire farmers, if it's not working, you'll find out about it. You do not need, sort of methods to tell you about it. There's no doubt they'll be sort of feeding back. So I'm obviously hopefully growing my expertise and everything like that. But the question is really, I suppose, this is the toughest question to ask. Where do we, as Scrutiny, and where do councillors add value? Because you've got all these EA, Yorkshire Water, drainage boards, and then we've got our particular niche, and then you've got the whole, the flood expertise officers like yourself. So where is it you see us adding value, apart from we all go out this room a bit more educated than we were? That's my first question. And the second question, I think, Councillor Burton's question about tree planting was going to be sort of one of mine. I think it's really interesting what you said about that. And when we've got the coming mayoral authority, and I sort of, you want to engage people more, don't you, with the mayoral authority? However they're going to vote, you want them to be more interested. And certainly I've been talking about buses and economic growth, but that whole flooding thing, that could be really interesting. And so my second question is far more trivial and far more silly, but Clifton Ings, do we own it? Or, okay, right, whoever owns it, would not planting trees on it be a lot better for just that little bit of, would it not improve the land in terms of the trees taking up the most? I know that really have a tiny, tiny part compared to all of these upstream planting, but would that not be a good thing?
I'll take the second question, then I'll look to James, because I'm sure the similar question about where do scrutinies add value has come up in various scrutinies. Clifton Ings, could we plant trees? There's been lots of academic work on the difference between a natural, an open floodplain where the water can just naturally pond and be stored and to slow the flow of the river, versus wet woodland, which is exactly what you describe. And would, by planting trees throughout Clifton Ings, would that provide more of a benefit? Of course, you'd get the actual percentage of the washland that would be taken up by trees would be seen potentially as a negative, but would it allow more water to be retained and soaked up? I think in the example of Clifton Ings, the Environment Agency operates 2.3 million tonne or cubic metre of storage there. There's an inlet and an outlet. They operate the inlet, they flood it, and it takes a small fraction, centimetres off the peak flood level in York. And when it's full, and it's no longer providing benefit. And as we've seen this winter, you get multiple peaks, and it's not really doing a thing. It probably wouldn't make a difference in Clifton Ings, just because the way that it's operated. It's operated as a reservoir, in effect. There's an inlet and outlet, and reservoir engineers inspect it to make sure it's integral and doing its thing. But there are lots of examples, and downstream in areas like Selby, where you get the tidal inundation, where trees can actually soak up more water. There are some, sorry, it's a long response to your question, to basically say there are some examples where woodland can increase and slow down the rate of which water would be getting back into the channel and is advantageous, others where it's less so.
I think in terms of the cheers for that. That's Steve. I think in terms of the role of members on internal drainage boards, I can see in some ways the very point you make.
Yeah, it was this, yeah.
Sorry, this committee.
Sorry, I was saying I'm on a drainage board. I'm very happy to be on the drainage board, but in terms of adding value, and we as a committee are looking at this, how can we as councillors add value, or the broader council, because you've got all these different parties, you know, EA and everyone like that, and then you've got what the professionals are doing. So how do we as councillors add value is my sort of question.
Well, Steve's brought you a paper today which focuses very much on the partnership piece. There is nothing to stop you if you wanted to do a specific piece of scrutiny around it, calling in other partners to the scrutiny. So historically, we have had the Environment Agency turn up to scrutinies previously, or to decision sessions when we're delivering the programme of flood defence works in the city. The Environment Agency used to come along with council officers to present that programme. So if you think a bit of the system isn't working after tonight, there is an opportunity to look at the system in the round. You don't just have to focus on what the council does. The scrutiny role can be broader than just what the council does.
Food for thought. Thank you, James. Councillor Fenton, is that supplementary? Okay. You're now at the bottom of the queue, but we will come to you. I've got Councillor Vassie.
Thank you, Chair. So I've been listening with great interest to all of this. What I think I want to talk about is multi-agency working in particular. And give you a couple of examples, one great example, one less so good, because so the struggle and the success. The council did a fantastic job of working with interested parties and local landowners to sort flooding on Church Lane in Elvington. It took a while. It was about collapsed drains. That's an issue in agricultural land right across York and much further, I imagine, because farmers, I understand, don't get any funding anymore for the drainage in their fields. So that was great. On the negative side, we're struggling with Broad Highway, which has exactly the same problem, flooding coming from broken drainage and cars being unable to use the road, etc. So multi-agency working with drainage boards and others, it seems to me from my experience, and I've had 4 years on the Infernal Drainage Board. So it is difficult, but I think it is hugely important. And the kind of challenges that I've seen in those 4 years, where I think the City Council has a huge part to play, is the Drainage Board has found it impossible to actually push through a biodiversity action plan. They're well aware of the fact that they have a huge part to play in this because they're flailing land all over the place. That's impacting on the watercourse, it's impacting on the banks. And I think there's an opportunity there. I know that recently the Internal Drainage Board I'm on has taken their employees to St. Nick's to help them to understand the biodiversity issues. And I think there's an educational role there that we can help with. And then the other thing, and this would be a recommendation really, Chair, is that I would love to see the council commit to exploring with the Internal Drainage Board operating a joint GIS mapping system to monitor the watercourses, flood risk areas, drainage, open spaces, our verges, all of those things, because as I understand it, currently, the council doesn't have GIS mapping to actually look at all these things, to look at our verges, to understand what's being cut where. The Drainage Board does have a GIS mapping system. I've seen it, it works really well. And I wonder if there's an opportunity for the council and the Drainage Board to work together to better understand together the movements of waters, the biodiversity issues, the flooding issues, by operating a joint system. And I wonder if that would actually save the council money in terms of being able to afford to do all of this going forwards. So I put that there because I've seen it over this 4 years, this continuous problem. They flail a watercourse, they throw all the rubbish on the side of the bank, it rots, that just creates more long grass. if they were doing it differently, it could be promoting biodiversity, animals, wildlife, flowers. We have the same challenge on our verges. So my suggestion is that an opportunity? Do you think that's an opportunity, Steve, going forwards to help manage things better?
So we do have a GIS system within the council. So we do. I think the challenge is whether the data on that GIS system is as good as it could be. So I don't think it's necessarily about the system. I think it's about the way we collect and keep data up to date is more of the challenge than the system you use. We are working on that slowly in public realm about collecting the data on grass cutting and verges and things. I'll let Steve comment on how good the data sets are on York Map in terms of the drainage assets.
Yeah, so similarly, we have a version of what we call York Map, which is the public facing map, which is used internally for public realm, as James says, but also for highways drainage teams. So on there, you know, the gully information is held and watercourse information is held. And you know, it's a forever evolving piece. And you know, it's where we've done investigations and schemes, the data's fairly good. There are other bits because a lot of this infrastructure is subterranean, below ground, and sometimes, you know, it's very difficult to assimilate that data. The IDB's mapping is good, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's any better than what we have. But we don't have information on our systems of what the IDBs have done or not done. I'm not sure how much we need to store in our systems to know where they've got to for their year's budgets and the like. You know, because that contemporaneous assessment of how their maintenance programs is going is something that we assess in the board meetings, isn't it? I think the bit that you allude to about how the board assesses their area in terms of priority, whether that's in drainage priority or in terms of biodiversity action plan target areas and target species and the way in which they maintain. You know, you talk about how they dump the arisings, because that goes back to a really old Land Drainage Act requirement that they can dump to the length of the arm of a JCB, you know, away from the channel, and you know they stick to that because that's what they're allowed to do, and all drainage boards around the country do the same. You know, so you know, we're challenging that in terms of the likes of yourself and Jonathan from St. Nick's now sits on the board. We nominated him on the FOSS. We are starting to challenge that. So they are starting to look at some of those policies and requirements from biodiversity action plans. They've not really got that in any sort of GIS way yet. So that would be maybe the next step about how they can start to show some of that stuff in their mapping and how they can illustrate that to the people and communities that they serve.
Thank you for that. Sure, yeah, I'm just
Yeah.
conscious of time, but go
Yeah.
go on, Councillor Lavassia.
Thank you for that. And I'm aware that one of the officers on the Internal Drainage Board, I'm on, Nathan Copen, is very enthusiastic to try and improve biodiversity and to work more cleverly at managing the land in a way that, I mean, Councillor Steward's right, there tends to be a fairly stick in the mud approach at the IDB, but there are also people there who want to move forwards. And some of the challenges I see are about equipment. They're about, well, we can't afford to buy the kit that would enable us to do it differently. And my experience of 4 years on the Drainage Board is this is a fantastic opportunity for the agencies to work together. And it's not just the IDB and the City Council. There's Yorkshire Water involved. There's the Environment Agency. But a lot of these challenges that I've seen us have over the past few years of not having the resources to do things better, my hunch from what I've seen is that the way through might be to improve multi-agency working. And I think the response you've given there is that you see the same opportunity. And so I suppose it's the question of how do we empower that? How do we empower you to make those approaches? Sorry, that's it. I finished.
No, don't have to apologise. I mean, do you want to respond to that? It was sort of, it was sort of a question.
Yeah, I think my response would be the advocacy that we give in IDB discussions, Yorkshire Water discussions, etc., is really important because that's what drives them to do things differently or consider different parallels because everyone has, targets and outcomes within their own organisations. So yeah, it's really important that we do that, but there's only usually one role, which is, my role, for example, that can do that. So sometimes it's difficult to actually, keep that momentum up with all these different agencies. So I don't know what that would be that would empower more, but the intention is welcomed. Yes.
I think all I would add is it comes back to what Councillor Stewart started with, really. That's why local councillors are on the IDB in the first place. Although you're there to represent the IDB when you're in that seat, you also bring with you that understanding of the way the city works in reality.
Councillor Kent, you wanted to jump in?
Thank you for your indulgence. Very quickly, specifically, are there any conversations that could be had just specifically about collecting arisings? Because that is going to be an issue for us because we don't have that equipment in-house for our verges. The IDB might or might not, but there are other, and Yorkshire Water, all of us need to do this if we're going to improve biodiversity. Is that a specific conversation we could have?
We can certainly have the conversation. I suspect the scale of what they will want to collect will be very different from what we want to collect.
And I think that's the really good point there. The scale will be the issue. Friends of St Nicholas Fields are working with the IDBs on a number of sites to actually get in there and remove some of those horizons and actually take them away and utilise them for composting or whatever it is. So they recognise the opportunities in trying to disrupt that way that maintenance has always been carried out. It would be that scale, across our green network, whether it's public spaces or verges, it would be really quite considerable, wouldn't it?
Right. I've got a sort of supplementary from Councillor Jane Burton, and then on my main list, I've still got Councillor Healy, Councillor Pearson, and Councillor Fenton. We'll close it there because we've covered a lot in this item, for which I'm very grateful. It's been extremely interesting, but we'll stick to that list and we won't add to it, if that's okay, colleagues. Councillor Jane Burton.
I just want to say I agree. Your knowledge is incredible, and it's been a really educational evening from that point of view. I'm slightly worried in a way that Councillor Vassie was talking about Malmo, and I'm worried that Roundtree Park in my ward is becoming a pond flood zone. Is that something that we could discuss tonight briefly, though? I know it's complicated. Maybe we could take it up.
I actually met with the friends of the park last week. We were discussing exactly that. They've lost. It was actually the press today, wasn't it? Did they lose 30% of the days last year? Was it? I can't remember what the figure was.
It's been huge. Yeah.
It's a significant amount. It's been closed for 3 months, obviously. Yeah. And they talked about the way in which they could be more resilient. They recognise that they sit on the floodplain. They recognise that in large flood events, the park will be inundated, and it always has been. Mm. But they want to explore ways in which they could get back on their feet quicker after a flood. How, a little bit like the King's Arms type example. How could they get back on their feet quicker? How could they draw down the water level quicker? How could they, reconsider the way in which the park is laid out and managed to make it more flood resilient? So they're certainly starting to explore that, and however possible, would look to advise on that. But it's for the friends of the park to really take that forward, I think, is the key thing.
And also, we have a lot of issues in Bishopthorpe Road with the drain there collapsing, I think, a lot, and the road being closed, and it's mended and it collapses again. There's nothing we can really do to make Yorkshire Water put in new drains. I mean, I know this is a problem throughout the country, isn't it? That we're relying on very old drains quite often.
Yeah, and that's often the case. All I would say to all councillors around the table and your communities is report.
Yeah.
Yorkshire Water and the way that Ofwat fund them relies on issues being reported to actually evidence the need. So even if it feels like you're reporting the same issue that you reported again, please report it, because they really do rely on that. And you know, if they are to evidence the need for replacement of aging infrastructure, then that would be the way. The other ways, which is embedded in the report, and I won't go into it in any detail unless it comes up in more of the questions, is that you know, there are new things called drainage and wastewater management plans, which government is requiring of all water companies. So they are starting that journey now of assessing all of their infrastructure to look at its capacity and its fit for purposefulness, for want of a better phrase, into the future. That would potentially drive them investing in some areas like that as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Councillor Healy, thanks for waiting as well.
No, certainly not, Chair. A micro question following on from good self, and then a sort of more macro one. Page 43, second sentence, reported issues are cleansed retroactively. If a councillor was to report a blocked drain, what timescale should that councillor be expecting it to be looked into or cleaned, I should say?
So, yeah, so any reports of defective drainage would be assessed. The inspector would go out and they would look at the priority and needs for that. If it was something that was causing potential risk to people, property, it would be done almost, you know, immediately, reactively. If it's something that's just seen as a slow runner, it would be put into the programme, and it could be anywhere up to a month. You know, the usual cycle.
Also a month.
Yeah, it depends on the priority of it.
Okay, thank you. More of a macro question. Patrick, in the earlier point, mentioned that there's £900,000 to be taken out of the place budget next year on a budget of 22 million. What do we need to look out for, and what do we need to keep the cabinet members' eye on to ensure that this sort of flooding work, which is a long tail risk, it's not something that's going to hit us every day, it's going to be something that hits us every 5-6 years. So the temptation is to sort of scrimp on maintenance, because it doesn't happen every day. What do we need to look out for so we can spot that erroneous item cropping into the budget?
I think you've answered your own question to a certain extent. I think it's making sure that when we, you know, put those difficult decisions in front of members in terms of where savings are taken, that we do that. What are the unintended consequences piece of work around the options that we're looking at? And there are always consequences. You know, the reason we provide services is because people value them in the main. So taking services out isn't done lightly. That due diligence that I talked about earlier tries to do exactly that piece of what is the impact of this budget change, and are we setting ourselves up or the city up as a result of it? But I think that challenge is good for whenever we're looking at the budget process, in terms of, have we thought about all those consequences that may or may not arise? But that could be, you know, I think that could apply to any budget line, or any savings. So I think it's looking at them across the piece to look at that. What are the unintended consequences? I'm not sure I've got a specific answer on flooding, but obviously that gully programme, I would suggest, is quite important to make sure that we keep on top of the drainage systems in the city.
Yeah, and I think it's on all of us as well to be honest with residents about the fact that there are no longer easy decisions. And you know, the temptation of politicians is to say, oh, that's going to go, even though some of us in the back of our heads know that if that thing doesn't go, these quite critical things might be under threat. It's these are the times we're in. It's pretty grim, really. Anyway, Councillor Pearson. Sorry.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, we've talked a lot tonight about flooding, which is obviously a really important issue, but I just wanted to raise the issue, which I think a lot of my residents are really annoyed about, is poo in rivers. Now, there's obviously two sources. There's obviously the poo that goes in from farms and from the slurry that's put on the plants, which is, you know, perhaps more acceptable than other types of poo. And there's the poo that comes from the sewers and when you have too much water, we've got discharging into the river. And I think for my residents is what more can we as a council do to hold Yorkshire Water and these other authorities to account and really have action such that we stop seeing. It's like I can take my nephews walking by the River Foss and go spotting wildlife rather than spotting turds. Thank you.
How to follow that? I think that's exactly where scrutiny and the executive members through decision sessions can really play their part. I think hopefully the paper conveys what Yorkshire Water are doing or saying they're going to do. All of the 66 combined sewer overflows in the city are regulated by the Environment Agency. The spill conditions are set. And in theory, you know, when you get extreme pressure on the system, those combined sewer overflows kick into action to prevent water, you know, that dirty wastewater going into people's properties, put it into a swollen river where in theory the increased flow down the river will take it away. And you know, we know that there's been many cases, not just in York but elsewhere, where these CSOs, to use the terminology, have spilt outside of those conditions. That can sometimes be because there's some kind of blockage in there, so it's operating outside of how it should. Or maybe it's not calibrated correctly and the sensors in there aren't working. But for whatever reason, you know, clearly the industry, you know, Fergal Sharkey and the like, and you know, the pressure around the country has led government to bring in its sewer overflow reduction plan. So between now and 2050, all water and sewage companies need to reduce spills from all overflows to approved levels. Between now and 2045, and there's two epochs of that, 2030 and 2045, which is in the paper. They have to do that on priority sites. They're more than likely, they're just confirming that in a minute, but they're more than likely to be areas where there are triple SIs and other environmental designations. It's less likely in the centre of York, but by 2050, all sites. However, Yorkshire Water are doing some work within this current funding programme. They worked 5-year funding programmes. So the current one ends in 2025, and they are investing in a number of sites in the city between now and 2025. And then they've got a programme of another, I can't remember if it was 13 this time, 17, rather than find it, in the next programme. So they are doing something a little bit above and beyond just purely what government is mandating. But so are all the other water and sewage companies because they recognise the importance of this. But we need to keep them to task. My fear is that they will identify and prioritise combined sewer overflows and potentially then not address some of those issues regarding, you know, ageing sewers that are causing, you know, disruption to our critical infrastructure, or, you know, in worst case situations, flooding people and property because they're not working effectively. Because I think their focus will rightfully be on that water quality in the CSO programme, but we need to keep them focused to actually address all of our needs. So I think that's exactly where this scrutiny committee or the executive members can really do that. So we did do some work under the last administration as all this started to come to light, where we brought Yorkshire Water in and we made sure that we understood their plans and how they were going to emerge. I think the challenge is there to keep that going, I would suggest.
Thank you for that. Councillor Fenton, did you want to jump in then, Councillor Kent?
Only quickly, I thought actually engagement with Yorkshire Water was a matter was put on the working party for this scrutiny, or was it the other scrutiny? I thought it was this one.
Yeah, it was ideally for this one.
Exactly for that reason, yeah.
Yeah. And I thought an invite was sent, but it wasn't, so
Okay.
we are where we are.
We can follow that up, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry.
Councillor Fenton.
Thank you very much. Quick question about future proofing, in terms of how the council plans a maintenance regime for example, the water courses we have responsibility for. Obviously, climate change is having an impact. It's in, I think of some of the water courses in my ward. they're waterlogged far more often. We have warmer, wetter winters. And that is having an impact not just on those watercourses, but the households in the surrounding area, because when more houses were built in the 80s, they just filled in a ditch. So the ditch stops, doesn't go anywhere because they've built houses where the ditch used to be in Acombe Wood. So now the remainder of the ditch is now overflowing far more than it ever used to. So in terms of our work programme, in terms of maintenance of the assets that we're responsible for, to what extent is there an awareness at the council that these watercourse flood events are likely to be more frequent, and is there any thinking going on about what, if anything, we can do to mitigate the impact? To finish off on.
Yeah, it's Acombe Wood was exactly the example I think you were going to be raising there, councillor. Yeah, so for other councillors, you know, the land in and around Acombe Woods and the farmers' fields just beyond that, absolutely saturated this winter. You know, repeats, named storms, and the ditches and drains in that area running absolutely full, aren't they? You know, in that situation, you know, I've instructed the team to look at options for providing additional capacity there, potentially digging out an area for a further pond in Acombe Wood, perhaps, you know, could relieve that a little. But you're absolutely correct in that, you know, the problem is often that the damage has been done. I know that sounds rather defeatist, but, you know, often, you know, if you look at the historic maps, you know, and the way in which drains and ditches have been filled in, you know, we're chasing our tail. So a lot of this work is unfortunately reactionary, you know, where we do respond to episodes that happen after significant rainfall. But we've done that for many years now. There are examples across all wards around the table and others that aren't represented here where, you know, the team has looked to improve the capacity of existing drainage and provide further resilience wherever possible. And, you know, we need to continue to do that. But again, it's reliant on, you know, that funding remaining in place, which goes back to, you know, the last few questions really, and retaining the knowledge within the authority. Unfortunately, you know, we've got, you know, a few wiser, more mature heads within the authority who, you know, who will leave over, you know, a number of years. And, you know, actually retaining that knowledge, you know, in any business, in any sector is always really difficult, isn't it? So there will be the challenges that we'll have going forward. But yes, we will see those issues arising. But, you know, we do investigate after every one of those episodes, and hopefully we can identify some solutions.
Thank you for that, Steve, and James too, and thanks for all the answers. It's been a genuinely interesting discussion, and at the very least, I'm sure it's brought members more up to speed with how all of this works. In terms of recommendations, I am open to colleagues' suggestions. One idea that I had, which is fairly specific, and, you know, the government might just respond the way they often do respond, but maybe they'll respond more positively. I think there might be a case to say that as chair, on behalf of our committee, together with the executive member, we could write to the relevant government department and minister to urge them to ensure that when these SUDS approving bodies go live, local authorities are properly resourced to deliver that work without taking on additional burden, not impacting on pre-existing services. I mean, who knows what they'll say back, but that sounds like an area of potential promise. But if we're having to take money from elsewhere internally to try and make that work, then we might not realise the benefits of it. That's just one idea that I had. Councillor Healy, yeah.
Variation on that. Given that we've got a general election and it's possible, maybe not probable, according to Councillor Stewart, we may have a change of government, you might want to include the main opposition in that as well. And
more than happy to.
if you wanted to, you could include the third party as well.
Which party would be the third party?
That would be us. Councillor Fenton just gave me a dirty look.
Yeah, more than happy to.
Yeah,
I'm open to that. I think it's a fair point. Yeah.
but yes, because
Yes, look, central government does have a habit of dumping unfunded obligations on.
Okay, thanks for that, councillor Healy. Did any other colleagues have ideas? I mean, this is a massive, or two big subjects really in one. It'd be good to get at least something out of this, so that's one thing. Any more? Councillor Stewart, you look like you might be. No, you're okay.
No, so I was more questioning how much we've got out of it by writing our letter. We'll write our letter to the government will write back, and I don't think the world will have changed. So I think the specific idea of that being a policy is very sensible, but I certainly don't support the mass writing of letters to people. I don't think we're going to gain anything at all from it. So I'm afraid, sorry to be negative, but I think we're at 0 things achieved so far rather than 1.
Well, it's all right. You don't need to apologise. I would understand any cynicism going off how the last 14 years have been. But I think anything's worth a pop, and at the very least, it would enable us to have a little more to hold whoever is responsible to account on. It's a very niche point, but it's an important one for this council. But I get the overall point. Scrutiny has its limitations, but we've got to get what we can. Councillor Pearson.
For what it's worth, I love a letter. So happy for a very strongly worded letter to go to the government to say this should be adequately resourced.
Thanks, Councillor Pearson. Councillor Jane Burton.
I noticed yesterday, I think it was, that they announced more places where you could go wild swimming. Are any of those places in York? No, well, I wouldn't fancy going to many of them anyway, to be honest, because people I know that do wild swim have caught really nasty bugs. I just wondered if we could all go there and make some sort of demonstration. But as there isn't one there, then forget it.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Yeah, get that down as a
Slight
formal suggestion. We all go
demonstration,
wild swimming as a committee.
Not
We could all
We
go
will,
wild
we will
swimming.
raise our profile with that, certainly.
I mean, it would certainly attract media attention. But I mean, I'm not minded to pass that as a recommendation. Were there any other ideas? Councillor.
Sorry, this is
Kent.
flippant. This is not an idea, but I, against all advice, do swim in the Ouse, and you're all very welcome to join me if you want.
Councillor Stewart and Vassy.
Okay, given the committee's desire to write letters, we've already got one letter. Is it worth writing a letter to all mayoral candidates to be on the front foot about what we would like them to do and what do they intend to do? Not least as that will be ahead of them being elected, so it could give a good chance for them to put on the record things they might like to do, which can benefit York.
There's a fine suggestion, Councillor Stewart. I'm happy to add those candidates to the list. Councillor Vassy.
Sorry, to add to that, we heard in the discussion the work that the council is doing to explore ensuring flood prevention measures are installed 30, 40 miles up from York to prevent the waters coming from us. That plainly is a strategic objective that any of the mayoral candidates should be aware of and support going forwards, because it impacts on all of us. So maybe that letter could refer to that and seek their support.
Yes, I'm comfortable with that. Yeah. I mean, as we say, who knows what responses we'll get, but I think there's value in the committee raising that. Thank you, Councillor Vassy. With that in mind, I'll bring this item to an end. Very much welcome everybody's patience, and once again, the contributions we've had. And very lastly, this isn't really a recommendation. Please just do it. Could you pass on thanks to all of the staff who've been involved in the reactive flood related work in recent months? It's probably something the council could do a better job about shouting about. You know, some of these are unsung heroes working at silly o'clock, doing probably quite difficult jobs. So thanks, I think, from myself and colleagues, getting a lot of nods. If you could circulate something to that effect to the relevant people, that would be hugely appreciated. Is that all right? Thank you. Okay, colleagues, I'm gonna call for a very quick refreshment break. Is 5 minutes sufficient from now? And then we'll wrap the rest of the meeting up. Thank you. Cheers.
This is almost like you're looking
Okay, so we'll resume tonight's meeting. Thanks for allowing that break, colleagues. The next agenda item is looking at the task and finish group review into dial and ride services. Now on this, the officer to my right, James from Dem Services, wanted to say a quick few words, but then once we've done that, I'll invite Councillor Fenton to give a spiel. But basically, I think we say if we're happy with what the group want to do, and credit to colleagues for sort of offering to do it. A lot of people talk about task and finish groups and don't actually want to see them through for a mix of often valid reasons. But then we need to work out how that impacts on the work plan. So yeah, fire away, James.
Thanks, Chair. I'll be very brief. I'll leave the kind of content to Councillor Fenton, but just to say that this task and finish review has been used as a kind of guinea pig, I guess, by Democratic Services to try and put together a new process for task and finish groups, given that there hasn't been one, I think, for some time. So the proposal document, which you've got in the agenda pack with the report, which Councillor Fenton had put together, has been used as to put together a template essentially for any future task and finish groups. So I think going forward, the idea was that a lead member for a proposed group would fill in this template, and then the template covering the kind of summary and rationale, aims and objectives, the methods that the review proposes to use, its impact on resources and its time scale. They then submit that to Dem Services, who would put a cover report on for it to come into the agenda, essentially. So just to kind of flag that so members were aware of it for any kind of future proposals. But yeah, I'll leave the detail of this group to Mr. Fenton.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly welcome that we have a starting point. You would have assumed that there was a set process for this sort of thing, but it turns out there wasn't. So credit to this particular set of 3 members for being trailblazers in that respect. Councillor Fenton, do you want to say a few words on the group?
Yeah, so obviously the template sets out objectives, tasks, timescale. We've had 2 information gathering sessions thus far where we've met some of the people on our list to meet and talk to and gather information from. So it's very much underway, and as with a lot of this work, you happen upon information and pick up leads that take you in different directions to perhaps where you thought you were going, but that's a good thing, I think. Just on the published document where it sets out the proposed timescale under item number 4, the dates have changed since then. We will not have completed all the tasks by this Friday. So we've got a new timescale, which is the tasks at point 3 should be completed by the 29th of March. We'll draft a report to share for informal review by the 5th of April. And then the intention, the aspiration is for us to bring a report to this committee at its meeting on the 25th of April, if other business allows. That might slip, depending on where our discussions take us, and if we feel we need to spend more time gathering information or considering sort of potential recommendations. But we're hoping to do it in a relatively timely fashion, because we're conscious that there isn't a service at the moment, and if there are opportunities for some form of service to be reintroduced, then we don't want to be in a position where we're told, well, we'd like to move faster, but Scrutiny, they're still spending a lot of time, navel gazing about this, that or the other. We do want to try and keep this as a concise piece of work as possible and come out with some hopefully plausible and sound recommendations. But I think we're realistic in terms of what we can achieve as three individuals, but we're trying our best. We'll keep you posted.
Thanks, Councillor Fenton. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and I'd just like to say thanks to Councillor Fenton because he's definitely, I think, leading on it and you know, really making a brilliant contribution in terms of writing the remit and driving the committee. It genuinely is enjoyable and interesting. I think the stuff we're doing, finding it very rewarding, and it's not an easy thing to sort out, is it? Because you know, we can't really make marginal slight recommendations. It has to be one sort of notable thing, but you know, and we're getting in deeper. But I think it's really good and positive. The one particular point I was going to make, which I've raised with sort of Councillor Fenton and Councillor Burton before, is that, long story short, but as part of this, York Wheels, which owns Dial and Ride, bought 2 buses for just under £200,000, which are Fiat engined buses, but basically done up to fit what Dial and Ride were looking for, by a company called Mellors, who have gone into administration. And the buses were nothing like they should have been. They were supposedly new and everything like that, but they've turned out to be very poor with all sorts of problems. The management of York Wheels are understandably fatigued with the process they've been through, and you know, with all the sort of hassles and headaches they've had. But there is one really crucial issue in terms of how we get taxpayer value from the buses. So from these 2 buses that are basically sat at Hazel Court, not working properly. And one aspect of that is likely to be the warranty with Fiat and how we can get Fiat to honour their commitments under the warranty. And the point is that obviously with a warranty like this, when Mellors has gone into administration, but Fiat is still going strong, you're going to face a lot of hoops and headaches, and you're going to face potentially a lot of deferrals. So it is one area where I think, if needed, council legal advice and help could add a great deal of value. And I think that if we were to sort of have the Dial and Ride, or the York Wheels people, sorry, approaching the council officers and say, can you help us with this warranty issue? Then they potentially go round and round. It's like, well, wait a minute, not really. You're York Wheels and we're the council and we've only got limited time. Whereas if we as a committee could give the steer that we are very, very well aware of the importance of resolving this issue, and if legal advice should be sought, it should be you know, hopefully well received. And that's not us signing some blank check about we're going to pay, you know, £20,000 of legal costs, but us saying, you know, we have legal people that York Wheels don't have, and if needed, we just give that sort of steer. So that's my suggestion, which I think it'd be good for us to have on the record, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense, Councillor Stewart. Thank you. James?
The only thing I was going to say, I think York Wheels are keen that we bring the future of the various buses to a head as soon as possible, in terms of they want to recover some of the value in their buses as well. So at very least, I think we should be letting them sell the buses that they own outright. And the pace at which we need to work, we can explore those points with legal before we make any decisions on it. But they're very keen that we bring this to a head as soon as possible.
Councillor Vassy and Councillor Jane Burton.
There we are. I'm alive. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I very much welcome this as a topic. As I was reading it through this afternoon, knowing I was subbing, there were a couple of things that came up to me. So I welcome the fact that it's looking at to identify services similar to York elsewhere. There's such a wealth of information. It took 2 or 3 minutes to find dial-a-ride services in Oxford, Durham, Lincoln and Bath. And immediately there were things in them that leapt out as being interesting. So in Oxford, it talks about a scheduled weekly dial-a-ride service along 9 routes linking the local community with transport hubs in larger villages, health services and supermarkets. So plainly there are models that are about linking these things to existing bus networks and obviously the study that will be done will look into all of this kind of stuff, I imagine. The one thing that I was really keen to see in terms of wording in this, we tend to see this over and over again, that we talk about provision in the city. And I think York is actually quite special in relation to lots of other local authorities because of these outlying villages and smaller communities and rural dwellings and things like that. So I don't know if it's a question of adjusting the words and whether Councillor Fenton would be happy with that. I'm sure he would, or just including it in the way it's thought of when this study happens. But that focus on rural areas as well as the city, to me, is important, because we're quite unusual as a local authority in having that combination of rural areas and city areas. That's the only point I want to make, but I hugely welcome the whole thing.
Given that there's a direct sort of
Just
question, suggestion, yeah.
If I could just quickly respond. So any references to city are the City of York Council area, just to be clear. And the main communities that Island Ride served were outlying villages. So that's very much the focus of, that's where the need and the demand was. So we're certainly not saying, oh, we don't need to worry about anything beyond the outer ring road. So just to reassure you that that's not the intention.
To be clear, Chair, the reason I raised it is in the local transport plan consultation. It was talking about the city all the time, and we made that point there because it helps. It's not. I have complete confidence that Councillor Fenton's going to do a good thing here. It's how things are seen. It's how things are seen beyond our committee, how the public sees it, and whether they feel included.
I fully hear you. But what I would say is Councillor Fenton has just sort of confirmed in public for all to see what the intention is. But yeah, I think the point's made. Councillor Jane Burton.
Okay, I just reiterate what Councillor Stewart said about Councillor Fenton, who's led on this magnificently. And we've had some very revealing sessions with interested parties. And I take your point, James, about York Wheels are keen to sell the vehicles, but the fact is they had £190,000 of money from the council, and they will get less than half of that back. And the buses have never hit the road, really, or barely. A company like Fiat surely can be made to do the right thing by these people who have been really overwhelmed by the task that they were given, really, to run the buses in really significant, difficult circumstances. You know, and companies going bust, they've got 45 pages of emails and telephone calls and letters that they've tried to sort out. It's just been beyond them, which is why Councillor Stewart is saying they need legal help, but they also need someone to intervene with I think Fiat and say, look, you know, these are buses for disabled and older people, and they were bought in good faith, and they've just not worked. They've right from the start, they've broken, and they were £190,000 for the two of them, and they had funds themselves, I believe, of around £100,000, which they've spent in trying to sort this out. They could have bought another bus. They no longer have that. So I think whilst it's a good thing to, you know, to recoup their losses, I think before we sell them off, or they sell them off, it would be good to give them a hand in trying to get more of that money back.
So, yes, James.
Just to come back, York Wheels have no contractual relationship with Fiat. The engines are from Fiat, but the relationship with Fiat is through Mellors, the company that have gone bust. So actually trying to follow that trail, as I say, we will, before any decisions are made on, I think we're discussing something outside of the Councillor Fenton's paper here, but before any decisions are made in terms of selling those vehicles or not, we'll make sure there is no legal recourse. But the contractual arrangement that York Wheels have is with Mellors, the company that have gone bust. Mellors had a relationship with Fiat. We'll need the legal advice about how strong that link can be made to pursue fiat or not.
Councillor Stewart, but I will briefly say, the purpose of this discussion is to basically say, yes, do the work and bring it to the next possible meeting. Councillor Stewart?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that. My point was to get it on the radar, not saying it's specific, but in terms of James's point, York Wheels are certainly of the view that the warrant, and they have said it's not the warranty with Fiat still absolutely stands. And my understanding, and I'm no lawyer, but my understanding would be if you buy a product from somebody and components in that have, you know, gone into administration, and again, that warranty would still stand. You wouldn't be losing stuff by the actual retail outlet that you bought it from, you know, going bust. Most people's cars have a warranty from the manufacturer. They don't have a warranty from the garage. So, you know, it is there.
But to come back to the initial discussion, I mean, look, I'm happy for this work to take place. I again welcome members putting their hands up to do it. Happily include it in the April meeting. Sort of have to take both agenda items at the same time. So just looking at the work plan, that April meeting is already pretty hefty. Digires parking enforcement, on-street EV charging. I'd be minded to move on-street EV charging to a future committee to make space for this report to be shared properly and discussed properly with colleagues' agreements. Yeah, thank you. Well, that's a decision, I suppose. But thanks again for running with this piece of work. Any more for the work plan item for now?
You on the work plan?
I'm on the work plan now, yeah.
Yes, Chair. Given that we will have been in a year of this term, would it be a good idea to invite the relevant executive members to come back and say what they're trying to achieve in the next year and how they feel it's gone the previous year? We've done this previously, it seems to have stopped.
I mean, I don't recall that kind of item in my time, but
That's what, yeah, it stopped in some time, well,
I mean,
Chris is on his phone.
look,
Stopped somewhere in the 8 years when I wasn't here.
I mean,
We used to have it.
I'm not against anything like that, but there's a risk that it would just go right round the houses. And the point of work planning is to try and concentrate discussions in a similar time, same date, get the right officers in the room at the same time. Doesn't always happen. But I mean, look, what the colleagues think.
Yeah, I was thinking May time. It's just not, we haven't got to May yet, so.
Yeah, yeah. Councillor Fenton?
I think what's set out in the Constitution, and I'm not saying we always adhere strictly to what's set out in the Constitution, that envisages that the first meeting of any annual cycle will be a sort of an informal meeting of the committee, similar to the one we had beginning of this municipal year, for committee members, senior officers, executive members, as a, you know, more of a sort of a look ahead than a look backwards in terms of what are either key decisions coming up on which some pre-decision scrutiny may be helpful, or are there any kind of lots slower burning issues that officers or executive members would like scrutiny to do some work on, potentially through a task and finish group. So that's an option, either a session such as that as an informal session, which is what we did at the beginning of this municipal year, or you could turn it into an agenda item at a public meeting. It can be either or. I think it's probably a good habit to get into. I appreciate though that issues will come up during the year that perhaps weren't on our radar at the beginning of the year, and they should still, you you know, we would still want them to come to committee.
Yeah,
If there's there's a policy development piece that perhaps wasn't as high profile at the beginning of the year, but has since come to the fore, we wouldn't say, no, we didn't discuss it in May, therefore we're not going to talk about it.
could we discuss this at the next scrutiny chairs meeting, because it'll cut across other portfolios, but yeah. I think that'd be tidier and get most value for all of our time, hopefully. Were there any other ideas, comments?
Part of this scrutiny's remit is economy, and cognizant of the fact that the mayor is going to be elected in May, who also has quite a large economy brief, and of the fact that we've just taken a budget saving in the economy team. Do we want to look into whether it makes sense anymore for us to still try and do an economy function with such a small amount of money, given the large focus, and I'd say probably the predominant focus of the mayor is around economic growth in the economy?
It's an interesting question. Is it more Councillor Whitcroft?
Yeah, I would say that we are still going to have an economic strategy as a city. A lot of the work that we've done hasn't necessarily been focusing on the local economic partnership, which is what will be merged into the combined authority. That is still going to be its own thing, but a part of the mayoralty. There will be appointed scrutiny committee for the mayor. I think it is worth us still having an economic scope, because I think, as I said at the last meeting when we talked about the framework for the economic strategy that the combined authority will have, we remain quite different in terms of what York has in terms of its economy and North Yorkshire has in terms of its economy. Now, you can look at the advantages that working together will have and all that good stuff related to the combined authority itself. I think it is worth us keeping, however, a York specific focus so we can engage with people like the bid and make it York to understand that I think those functions of our economy are going to be separate to what the mayor is going to consider. And I think they do deserve City of York councillors scrutinising that specifically. That's my view anyway.
Yeah, and to me that makes sense, and I think it'll be incumbent on whoever chairs this committee in the future to have a clear sight of that, to make sure the discussions are as appropriate and relevant as possible. It's certainly one to watch, Councillor Ely. Yeah, it's an interesting one. Go on.
Coming back to your earlier point about cuts, it's just that we're getting to the point where we've salami-sized some of these teams down to so small. The value that they're then giving back to us, compared that there is another higher authority that's going to be looking at it. Are we basically just wasting our money? Because we've taken that function and essentially shrunk it too far.
Hold that thought, Councillor Stewart.
Yep. Yeah, I think Councillor Healy makes a good point, and I think this whole point about and I'm more in the Councillor Healy than the Councillor Whitcroft camp on this, because I do think that Make It York has economic growth, the mayor's going to have economic growth, and we're going to have economic growth. So with our cut down team, how much difference do they really make versus how much are they reporting? So for me, this is something that could very much be one of these low officer level of time task groups, like we've done with Dial and Ride. Potentially Councillor Healy, Councillor Whitcroft, just to look at some of these, have a think about it and throw something out. And related to that, obviously it's come up in the budget, but are there any other items from the budget that we can think about should the council be doing? Now, one thing I'll throw out, it's not something I would advocate now, but in the budget savings, there was a possibility of going grey bin, green bin, recycling, grey bin, green bin, recycling, and that would save about £800,000. Now, I think if you said that to most people out there, they'd be like, horrible cuts and everything like that. But then if you broke it down, I think for a lot of people out there, if you say, well, that would equate to about 1% on council tax, What do you think? So that would be an example, you know, the sort of Councillor Healy point about the economic growth team, something about would you have your grey bin collected a bit less frequently? You know, and I appreciate that would be very hard for a lot of households, who've got, you know, nappies or whatever it may be, like those sorts of things. But my point is, are there sensible conversations we can have as councillors across party about budget items, potentially going out to the public at large, rather than the whole way we currently do the budget, this year, last year, every year, you know, where it's all a bit of a farce and a bit of a show event. And that's the thought, really.
I mean, look, I think that's a fair idea for a possible task and finish group. Very, you know, it could be a good one to have a lot of resident involvement in. I mean, look, I'm minded to say to each of you, can we think on it a bit more? If you want to have a discussion with me outside of the meeting, up for doing it. I hear the point on the economic function. It's quite early days though still. So it might be something we have to feel out as we go, but look, exactly what that looks like, it's not for me to decide. I think it's an interesting issue you raised, but I think Councillor Whitcroft makes some valid points too. So can we hold these thoughts? And if we do end up doing an informal work planning meeting, we can get into it more. Equally happy to meet with committee members of all colours outside of this. It is also getting on quite a while now. But as you can tell, I'm quite happy to stay here for a very long time with many of these. But as things stand, are we okay for now with the work plan as is? It takes us up to April. There'll be a scrutiny chairs meeting before then, and who knows what the future will bring. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Thank you all, and thanks James for sticking with us, and to the Democratic Services officers supporting us. Hope you all have a good evening, and thanks to the millions at home watching too. Cheers.